Hello and welcome to the 3D Blu-ray Bunker. This is a place for us die-hard fans of 3D where I look exclusively at 3D Blu-rays, not to do a movie review but to focus almost entirely on the film's 3D, with just a short word at the end about the film itself. And this time I'm looking at the 2016 Marvel film Doctor Strange. It's obviously a post-conversion, like all of the 3D Marvel films, and on the 3D Blu-ray this has a variable aspect ratio switching between 2.39 to 1 and 1.9 to 1. I've mentioned before that I'm not a fan of this. It always strikes me as being a bit gimmicky, and I think the best way to watch a film, if you're using a projector, is for your screen shape to match the shape of the movie. So whatever shaped screen you have, that means sometimes either using side masking or masking at the top and bottom as appropriate when necessary. But obviously when the aspect ratio varies, that's just not possible. I know lots of people are fans of these IMAX sequences, although at home, in terms of resolution, shape and size, these scenes don't really have any more in common with IMAX than the average TV show does. Anyway, that's what we've got here, so if you like that sort of thing, you'll appreciate that they've retained its theatrical IMAX shape-shifting scenes, and there are a lot of them throughout the film, not just limited to the big special effects shots either. So, like I said, the 3D here is post-converted, but it looks pretty obvious to me that the entire film was created and shot with a very strong eye for how it would look in 3D, and it really does look quite excellent. It's worth mentioning up front, though, that this isn't the kind of 3D that's going to keep pop-out fans particularly happy. Whilst quite a bit of stuff does move out in front of the screen, it's hardly ever in an obvious way. It's kind of funny that maybe the most overt piece of negative parallax in the film features a shot of a butterfly, something that's known for being delicate and gentle, which I think is nicely symbolic of this film's 3D pop-out. Where the 3D is superb, though, is in the detail within the depth in almost every scene. This is a film where, brilliantly, the extra dimension in its presentation is often there to emphasise the extra dimensions within the film's story. So looking at this portal, for example, it sits quite deep into the screen, and the view beyond it is clearly even deeper still. And I love that the way the spinning sparks of the circle have a depth of their own. It's clearly not a flat wheel of sparkles. This is fantastic and a really novel example of 3D being a perfect, and I'd say essential, augmentation of the film. So right from day one, the film's set-piece visuals were obviously compared to Inception's, as the whole folding cityscape thing is very similar, but seeing it in 3D makes it much more powerful. I think there's something about seeing a 3D view of a scene from an unusual angle that makes the 3D even more striking than the same strength stereo would be if the view was the correct way around. So this looks especially excellent. And the 3D in these shots is significantly stronger than natural human vision, so this is a hyper stereo view, and all the better for it in my opinion. Here as well, the 3D is so strong that it might give that feeling of miniaturization, but even if it does, I think that's still thematically in keeping with what's going on in the story. And if you like hyper-stereo views as much as I do, there's quite a nice one of Kathmandu with a nice wide virtual stereo base, and I think an even nicer view of Hong Kong, although this is one of my few negatives with the film's 3D, because this view only lasts for a few frames before they spoil it by putting up the location text, which strikes me as being entirely unnecessary, not just because the view of Victoria Harbour is very famous, but even if it wasn't, we already had it made very clear to us that there are three significant locations in the story, New York, London and Hong Kong, and by this point we've already been to the first two, so this was a bit of a shame. What wasn't a shame, though, was that when we got the cityscape shot of Manhattan, it was a glorious hyper-stereo, just gorgeous. There was a similar shot to this in the natively filmed movie Spiders, although that one probably didn't feature Tony Stark's building in it. For a post-converted shot, there's so much here that's been put into its own strong space. This is a beautiful view, and I admit it's the kind of thing that I'll freeze frame just to drink it all in. Alongside the distorting streets and buildings, I guess the film's other most obvious use of 3D is in all of the sorcery, where shapes of light and sparks are conjured up. There's a lot of this stuff, and the 3D is all done extremely well with it. I assume the CG would have been overlaid in natively rendered 3D for a lot of this, and it's not just the shapes themselves, but I love the detail of all of the sparks flying around them, which makes the 3D here all the more impressive. I think these are good examples, albeit amongst hundreds, where I just fail to understand how any 3D naysayer can't appreciate what the stereoscopy is adding to the viewing experience. It's not all big ticket and obvious stuff where the 3D shines though. For example, there's a beautiful shot where his veins or arteries are magically lit up from within to help guide the needle, clearly existing in 3D space beyond his skin. And I love this subtle but still quite excellent use of 3D. And maybe more subtle still is the close-up of Strange's watch. If you're a wristwatch guy, you'll appreciate that he's got several very nice Swiss watches. And this is the one that he wears during our time with him, a Jaeger LeCoultre Perpetual, in which they managed to create some solid depth beneath the crystal to the dial. I guess this is product placement, and I'm sure Amiga shifts quite a few Seamasters on the back of James Bond. But are any Marvel fans really persuaded to go and buy something like a $30,000 JLC because one's featured here? I suppose it's possible. Stranger things have happened. I'm not quite so upmarket myself, and I confess that my 3D movie wristwatch of choice is the Casio I bought after seeing Jake Sully wearing one in Avatar. And like is often the case with wristwatches in films, there's all sorts of symbolism going on with this one, and the fragmentation of time might be a bit heavy-handed for some people, but as long as the 3D is as good as it is here, then I'm happy. And speaking of heavy-handed, there's a superb view of his clunkily repaired, damaged fingers. This shot really putting us in Strange's mind with an almost VR type of view of the injury. It's a low-key piece of 3D, but extremely effective at conveying the sense of injury. And when we see him exercising his fingers, I think the 3D enhances the view by bringing out the tension in the bits of elastic that he's got to fight against. It's very minor, but again, very effective 3D. One of cinema's much-used shots, people behind a rain-spattered window, makes an appearance, and these often look really nice in 3D, which this one does. And the 3D works well, placing these two characters together in a sheltered space. There's a shot in the hospital where Strange and Christine have to talk with the family of someone on whom they've just operated, and as well as using their body language to reveal a bit about each of their characters, I really love the way that the 3D places us behind the doors, what makes the 3D feel like it's a sort of respectable distance. I think they made some brave production design choices, knowing that a lot of complex and difficult things would have to be converted into 3D, like the fence at the basketball court, which we see a lot of, but it works really well, or the interior of Tilda Swinton's hangout here with its intricate carvings. But they not only manage to convert it, they do it very convincingly. The street scene in Nepal is very reminiscent of a similar shot in the excellent 3D film Everest, with everything clearly sitting in separate 3D space. The streets look fantastic and deep, and maybe my favourite view in this location is looking down over a jumble of cables. This is more really nice 3D composition. The Hong Kong streets look superb too, with their neon signs hanging across all sorts of 3D space. Another excellent view, and one of those moments where I really wish that the 4K HDR disc spec could have included 3D. But certainly I'd never take the 4K Doctor Strange disc over this one. You might not be able to see it very clearly here. It's in the film's darkest scenes, but the library has these bookcases which are like frames on which the book is placed flat. It's incredibly inefficient in terms of use of storage space, but incredibly inspired and well designed to work beautifully in 3D from multiple angles. There are loads of corridors in the film across several different places, all stretching deep into the screen. It's a classic 3D location, and one which I think I'll come back to in a moment, as it's a bit special. There's a trippy sequence, maybe not entirely original, with it bringing to mind various other films like 2001 and Avatar, to name a couple, moving through streaks of light. It's extremely well done, but perhaps a little bit too choppy most of the time for the 3D to be as excellent as I'm sure it would have otherwise been. We get a couple of moments of bullet time in the film, where the camera appears to track around a moment of frozen time, a technique that's very relevant in this film, obviously. This is the effect that came to mainstream notice in The Matrix, although it had first been used in photography over 100 years before that film. And when these time-slice shots are filmed the old-fashioned way, with a bank of cameras, they naturally allow for the shot to be seen in 3D, as you automatically, if accidentally, are creating left and right eye views. So I guess every bullet time shot ever taken, and only ever seen in 2D, could theoretically be reassembled into 3D. But anyway, here are some very lovely 3D time-slice shots, although I'm not sure if these are native 3D done with a bank of cameras, or just with a slab of silicon and some very clever computer people. I'm sure you're familiar with the image of what I think is known as an impossible triangle, or the more complicated impossible drawings by M.C. Escher of things like 4 adjoining sides of a staircase that appear to continue in an upwards direction on every side. And these are things that can only exist as 2D images, or actually people have made solid 3D models of them that work, but only when viewed at a single extremely specific angle and in 2D. Well, there's something similar going on here, where the 3D is forced to cheat a bit. So for example, the road at 2 o'clock here with the blue car approaching the zebra crossing initially looks like it's in the same 3D space as the central white box junction, but when the camera moves, the 3D reveals it to be in a completely different 3D space. Like I say, I think it's sort of a cheat, but in a really fun kind of a way. So this film is full of extremely good 3D, but there are a couple of shots that I think stand out as being exceptional. They're both the same type of shot, and that's a CG version of the zoom dolly. At least I assume that this is all CG. So as he's running down this corridor, instead of a camera tracking along and reverse zooming, the CG environment is being manipulated to make it stretch. The effect is fairly breathtaking, and it feels like it's the highlight of the film. But then we get the same thing on a much bigger scale, so here they are poised to fall into what's probably the film's main set piece, and when they do, like in that corridor shot, the twisted cityscape that they're falling into stretches as they're falling, incredibly deeply into the screen. It's absolutely filled with objects in their own separate and shifting 3D space, an utterly stunning 3D shot, not just the standout in a great 3D film, but I think this is one of 3D cinema's best shots. I've no idea what a shot like this cost to create, but I'm guessing that it could probably pay for a box full of those Swiss watches. And maybe unlike them, I'd say this one was worth every penny, genuinely extraordinary and astonishing. And more than that, it's completely appropriate to the story being told, as it actually enforces the feeling of the manipulation of time and space. I think this is masterful 3D. So just a very quick word about the film itself. I'm not any kind of hardcore Marvel fan, although I have seen all of the films, but most of them only once and probably not in the correct order, primarily because all but I think the first 3 of them are in 3D. So prior to seeing this film, I had no idea who Doctor Strange was. In fact, the only time I'd ever even heard of him was in an old song by Mark Bolan and T-Rex. Anyway, I enjoyed this film quite a lot. Benedict Cumberbatch might look like an odd casting choice at first, but I've always thought there's something detached, aloof and slightly otherworldly about him, which seems to be just right for this role. And I think he's a great actor and he's turned in a lot of excellent performances, although to me he'll always be Captain Martin Creef in John Finnemore's brilliant Cabin Pressure. Rachel McAdams, Benedict Wong, Chiwetel Ejiofor and Mads Mikkelsen all seem to hit the right tone for their characters, and when Tilda Swinton delivers her line, "But look at me stretching one moment into 1,000 just so that I can watch the snow," to me that's almost up there with Rutger Hauer's Tears in Rain Blade Runner monologue. It feels to me like it works perfectly well as a standalone film, although I'm sure that the hardcore Marvel fans got a lot more out of it with all sorts of references from the bigger picture that will have passed me by. Even if you have no interest in the MCU, this is a pretty essential disc for any 3D Blu-ray collection, although to be fair, I think that's true to say of all of the Marvel films, certainly from Phase 3. So you found this in some way useful, and if so, I hope you'll join me again soon for another 3D Blu-ray review. Until then, thanks for looking on this one, cheers for now, bye bye.